Hey, this is going to be a review of a series called The Chosen. The Chosen, it is a free series that you can watch on its own app. So it's a streaming app that only has one show. That show is The Chosen, the story of Jesus of Nazareth, told by Christians and done in a series. It's not a movie. It's not The Passion of the Christ. It's a series. And I want to talk about a few things with it. I just finished season 2 this week. They're hoping to do like 7 seasons. And so I watched the first season and I was like, wow, this is actually just like a whole couple levels above what I'm used to seeing from Christian-made media in general, especially anything that's like a larger-ish budget movie series that's just like overtly Christian. So it's like, this is probably gonna be some of the best overtly Christian art. And when I say Christian, I'm thinking particularly like evangelical, Western Christian views. There is probably a lot that Catholics, I think, would get out of this as well, and other Christian denominations. The star of the show, who plays Jesus, is actually a Catholic. He grew up Eastern Orthodox when he was very young, and then he converted to Catholicism of all. And so, but the guy who makes it, Dallas Jenkins, is I'm a huge fan of Dallas Jenkins ever since I first pulled the movie out of my church library in my 20-somethings that was called Hometown Legend. And I saw that music was done by Jars of Clay, and I'm like, oh, I love Jars of Clay, so I watched the movie, and it was just one of these movies that seemed like an honestly good independent movie, like in that charm kind of way, independent charm, but obviously, well, not actually obviously, it was done by a Christian, and I'm like, oh, this is the kind of art that I would actually like to see more of, and so I'm going to support this guy. I've been following his career, so when I found out that The Chosen was his project, I'm like, oh, Dallas Jenkins, I love that guy, but he is definitely, obviously, an evangelical, has that worldview of an evangelical. Anyway, what I want to talk about with The Chosen is the things that I liked. The accuracy of the storytelling is what I'm going to call that. And then things that I like and don't like kind of at the same time, especially with the portrayal of Jesus himself. And then things that what can I say? There was something else there as well. Oh yeah, and the stuff that I don't like as much, which is just the subject of thematic subtext, thematic dialogue, the kind of the spoken theme of the piece, as it were, or the subtextually spoken theme in a lot of cases too. So to start off, I loved the way that it seemed like they put research into this project. Somebody was putting some really cool research of the story of its time. It's a period piece as far as stories go, as far as movies go or series go. It's a period piece from Israel of the zero BC, AD, or whatever, AC, whatever you call it, AE. I can't remember the terms anymore. The date 0 period in Israel. And the way that they present the views of the Israelites and the way that they present the views of the Romans and the way they think about each other, the way they treat each other. Season 2 really got into the politics of the day of that time, which I loved that. I loved the way that the Pharisees are shown as people, like as real people that have real ideas and real perspectives. Pharisees have been villainized and demonized by, especially evangelicals and well, Western Christians and things like that. Especially in passion plays and stuff, where they just seem like kind of the thin 2D villain characters of the story. But these guys have depth. The disciples have depth. There are kind of the traditional 12, Peter and the gang, but they do definitely make space for females in it, but only kind of as much as the story allows. It doesn't feel like they're trying to like completely do a gender swap or like really shoehorn things that didn't actually fit in there to begin with. So it's just, you get Mary Magdalene, who has like this getting pulled out of a prostitution life kind of story. Brought out of poverty to an extent, which is really cool. And then you have a couple of other women, one that was like a wine merchant at the wedding of Cana, or Cana, however that's pronounced. And then you've got another woman that joins up that's this Ethiopian woman that was, I think, the woman at the well that has her story told to her by Jesus, and then she's impressed by that and tells everybody how cool this guy is. And then Mary, Jesus' mother, also comes into play in season 2, which is really cool. Jesus is shown as a real person with depth. At one point, Mary, mother of Jesus, is talking about how, well, when he was born, he started crying. And I had to, like, wipe him off. He was, you know, the stuff. It's like he was a real boy. And she told it in a way that was almost like she was shocked and that everyone was kind of bothered by it. And I'm like, yeah, I can see how, from a modern viewpoint, there's a lot of Christians that are like, what? Somebody had to wipe Jesus's bum? So I can see how that plays well to the audience. But personally, there are certain things about that I'm like, I don't know. Did they really expect their Messiah, even if they believed that Jesus was the Messiah, like wholeheartedly from the get-go? Did they really expect him to be that inhuman? And so, to summarize what I love, it's like they researched enough of the story to tell the story well. They're not doing a documentary. This is not like modern history where they're trying to go with just objective facts as much as possible. They researched it enough to be able to tell subjective thought, to say, here's what the story was in its day, and here's our retelling of the story from our own perspective, with our own media, using these actors, using these beautiful sets and these costumes, and the music is okay. One thing about it that I always feel a little bit of tension over is that this is kind of like what I would call the gospel according to Texas. And that's because it was filmed in Texas. It's not on set in Israel or anywhere in the Middle East. We're talking Texas. And so the Baptist or evangelical or whatever perspective that is kind of the most dominant one down there, you can't help but feel like that's a little bit ingrained in the landscape. And so there's that. But you know what? It's, you know, I can put up with that. I can get over my what's the word? My anti-Southern American evangelical bias, because I need to. These people are real people. They're real Christians. Okay, enough about me and that. But of course, this is about my own perspective of the movie. This is my own take on it. You don't have to, sorry, the series, not the movie. This is my own take on it. You don't have to agree with anything I say. I'm just trying to honestly stick to my subjective feelings on it, how it made me feel. I felt tension over the fact that Jesus is portrayed in a way that is, there's that part that makes him feel human, which is awesome. And he does have this depth that, along with the other disciples, that it's like there's some real backstory, there's some real humanity here. But they can't seem to help but want to make it like, I feel like they want to present Jesus as more godly than I would expect him to be. And that, of course, sounds weird, I'm sure, to Christians. But it's like, when I guess my theology has come to the place where it's like I believe that Jesus was who he said he was, and that God is most expressed and most exhibited in Christ. And in that, the way that God limits themselves, the way that God shows themselves as a weakness, as a weak human, more fully explains who God is than if God was showing himself as being all-powerful and all-knowing. The Jesus in The Chosen feels like he is all-knowing, that he has a spidey sense, a prescience, that's like, one of the disciples literally asks the other one, can he even be surprised? And it's like, it's almost like the answer they're trying to say is, yeah, I think so. No, I don't think so. I don't think he can actually be surprised. I don't think that anything is surprised him. When he performs miracles, like the healing of a lame person at the waters of Bathsheba, I love that story, very close to me. healing, yeah. Or the healing of the man with the shriveled hand, the lame hand. What's that called? I forget. Anyway, in the synagogue, it's like the disciples are like, "Oh, where are we going?" And Jesus is like, "I'll show you when we get there." And then he shows up and it's like, You've been like this for too long. Boom, you're healed now. All right, guys, let's hit the road. And it's like, okay, I can see how Jesus could have been like that. Like, there are certainly moments in the Gospels where it's like he knows more than he seems like a normal person would. That's part of the miracle. And I've experienced that in my life with other people, where it's like I feel like God has given me something that I can speak into their lives that I don't understand it myself. It's just something that they understand more than I do. Or when somebody has spoken to me that way, in this like word of prophecy thing, where it's like, it's kind of like an old wise person speaking to you, and it's like they know your heart without having to fully understand it. They just have a sense of something that they see, that they've heard in you, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly where I am right now. This like speaks to where I'm at. That resonates with me, and I could see Jesus doing that very easily, but somehow being like this Superman guy, like he what it does is I feel this tension about him, and feeling uncomfortable, feeling tense about Jesus is something that I need. All right, Jesus is supposed to be this controversial figure. When I say supposed to be, he is a controversial figure. If you read him and you discuss him with other people, there's going to be controversy. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be like, oh, I felt this way. I think that Jesus is emphasizing this type of life more than this type of life. Well, I think it's the opposite. That is who Jesus is. I don't think I think it's inaccurate to try to portray him any other way. But I'm disappointed in that my tension over the portrayal of him in The Chosen, what I'm feeling is like, oh, you know what? This guy seems a bit too much like a cult leader. I feel like he's so close to, like, if somebody were speaking this way to me now, and I was seeing what they were doing, I would be so suspicious of how they could be like saying these things, being this nice to manipulate people, and he's just acting like he knows everything, and he's just acting like he isn't surprised by anything, and I know how that sounds, but it's like, that's the tension, and I'm like, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I guess even in a way, it feels like he's a charismatic, Pentecostal, evangelical TV evangelist kind of a guy. I'm going to lead everybody. I'm the one. You guys all got to focus on me. I'm the one who's got all the truth. And that leads me to my the other thing that I'm not crazy about is something that I've only started to become familiar with, which is in writing, there's a term called thematic subtext or thematic dialogue, where there's a story being told, and the story has a theme to it. It has a point to it. The author is trying to express something that they feel and that they see in the world. Generally, like, you can do a story without a strong theme to it that just feels like life in the day of kind of thing, that's not trying to say very much. You can certainly go more into making a statement. And of course, an evangelical portrayal of the gospel is going to have a strong, here's the message to it, right? But they do it smartly. They do thematic dialogue smartly. It primarily comes up almost every single episode, especially in season 2. I don't know if I noticed it as much in season 1. I haven't watched season 1 since it first came out, basically. But the disciples are talking, and they're discussing and questioning, like, well, is Jesus doing things because it's this way? And maybe it's that way. And they'll often even get into arguments, which is actually, I feel like, really cool. Like, that's really relevant. And they could very well have been doing this. But unfortunately, it's like they do it so much. And because they fall into what I feel like is a trap of evangelical thought, and I think even the age of reason that we've been in for a couple of centuries now or whatever, that we can have objective truth, that we can have it's a fallacy. It's like we can have all the right answers if we just do it right. And I think that that's not the most valuable perspective to take in living in this world. You can say what you want to try to figure out what that means or doesn't mean, but it's like there's just a thing that I have about that where it's like I have this tension. Having good questions is often more valuable than having the right answers. And thinking that you have all the right answers or that you're getting close to or you're on your way to having all the right answers, I'm like, that's not actually that valuable to life, I don't think. There are answers that are good. There are answers that have righteousness to them. The only problem is they tend to break down after enough time. It's like you have an answer that's good for right now, and then later on you need a new good answer. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm going to try not to sermonize because right now I'm getting into what is basically a thematic statement of how Luke feels, how Luke views the world. And there are moments when you're watching TV or movies or plays where suddenly a character stands up and says something that almost feels like they're preaching a sermon about what the story is about. And they're saying, and this is the moral of the story. And what their thematic dialogue in The Chosen does is it often ends with, usually Jesus comes in at the end of the dialogue and just does the mic drop. And it's like, boom, truth bomb. Here's the right answer. And a lot of the time, it's a really good answer. So it's hard to argue with it. But it's like after enough times, I just feel like, dude, you know, we get it. You don't have to do this every time. It would be as if Jesus was telling a parable and then a Pharisee like Nicodemus or some grand teacher stood up afterward and like a modern preacher would then say, don't worry, everybody. It's confusing. But here I go. I'm going to explain what Jesus meant. And that's what I don't like about it. And so that's about it. I do still highly recommend this show. It made me weep a couple of times in a really, really good way. And gosh darn it, those good answers can hit you just like, yeah. When it got to the last episode, man, when Jesus was getting ready for the Sermon on the Mount, and you get to see, you understand what his inspiration was for that, all that gave me the feels. There are a couple of things that I really hope they resolve in season 3 or sometime in the not too distant future. One being that as Jesus was preparing for the Sermon on the Mount, there was like this big, what felt like church. What felt very much like not going to church, but like working in church, working as a pastor, where the disciples are literally handing out flyers to advertise for the Sermon on the Mount. They literally have to acquire land to gather people on. And so it's like, yeah, land acquisition. That's a huge part of church business. I'm going to buy land, build a church. Going to build a new church. They don't build the church, obviously. It's an outdoor thing, so that's cool. But the way that they acquire the land is actually, there's a bit of underhandedness to it. Or at least there's a story that goes alongside of it where there's some guys that are manipulating a Jew and they're doing it for financial gain. And then these guys end up actually helping out with the land that people gather on for the Sermon on the Mount. So it's kind of a side attached story. And I feel like that makes me uncomfortable to trod over what is sacred to the Jews, their family land and stuff like that. For the sake of preaching the gospel and saying like it's justified. That scares me. So I'm hoping that there's some resolve to that story that like doesn't just show, hey, make way for Christianity, get out of the way everybody else's culture, because I feel like that is some really, really, really dark, dangerous waters that is a huge problem in Christian history, and we don't want to repeat that. There are some good solutions to this, good answers to this that are not that. Anyway, I'm not going to go any further on that. The last thing I'm going to say is Mary Magdalene's story is cool. She gets saved from some self-harm. There is some trauma that has happened to her. You find this out like really early on in the first episode of season 1. But yeah, it's a little bit of spoiler warning. And then in the middle to end of season 2, there's her revisiting her trauma and trying to deal with it. And so far, she doesn't really deal with it very well. Her shame that she feels is handled well by Jesus and by the other women in particular, by making her feel like, no, you don't have to feel ashamed. What you're going through is not evil. What you're going through is not more sin. You're just recovering from it, from this trauma. And you don't have to feel bad about that just because you aren't, like, you know, pure, not making any mistakes ever. It's okay. You experienced something terrible, and you need to heal from that. And so far, that's all they've done. They haven't done any work of healing her from the trauma. They've just talked about her. Oh, she feels so bad. She feels ashamed because she slipped up again. All she did was freaking gamble and get a drink. And she's like, oh, I should feel worthless. And it's like, no, you feel worthless because of the trauma and because of the shame attached to that. Let's please show the real deep healing of the trauma rather than just, oh, I should feel ashamed. No, you shouldn't. You're okay now. Jesus is here. And sorry, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that makes a lot of sense to me in my story. In dealing with trauma, I don't want people to stop at the, oh, I feel ashamed and I don't know how to deal with the shame. Don't worry, you shouldn't feel shame. That to me is like a bad place to end the story. And so I really look forward to seeing her get some better healing, being able to live as she's meant to. Yeah, I think I've ranted long enough. This has been over 20 minutes of review. Thank you for watching.